Once upon a time, there was a miller who had 3 sons. When he passed away, he left his mill to the eldest, his donkey to the second, and to the youngest son. All he had left was his cat. The young man, whose name was Thomas, was terribly disappointed. "What am I supposed to do with a cat?" he sighed. "I'll probably have to eat him, and then I'll starve to death." Hearing this, the cat, who was surprisingly clever, sat up and said, "Don't you worry, my master. Just get me a pair of boots and a sack, and you'll see that your inheritance is not as bad as you think." Thomas was astonished that his cat could talk, but he was also curious, so he spent his last few coins on a fine pair of little boots and a sturdy sack. The cat put on the boots, slung the sack over his shoulder, and marched proudly into the woods. He was no ordinary cat. He was Puss in Boots. He cleverly caught a plump rabbit, put it in his sack, and went straight to the king's palace. Bowing low before the king, he said, "Your Majesty, I bring you a gift from my master, the noble Marquis of Carabas." The king, who loved rabbit, was delighted and thanked him. Puss in Boots did this for several months, always bringing gifts of game to the king, and always saying they were from the Marquis of Carabas. One day, Puss learned that the king and his beautiful daughter, the princess, were going for a drive along the river. He rushed back to Thomas. "Master, do as I say, and your fortune is made. Go and bathe in the river at the spot I show you, and leave the rest to me." Thomas, though puzzled, did as Puss said. As the king's carriage passed by, Puss in Boots began to shout at the top of his lungs, "Help! Help! My master, the Marquis of Carabas, is drowning." The king recognized the cat who brought him so many tasty gifts. He immediately ordered his guards to rescue the Marquis. While Thomas was being pulled from the water, Puss told the king that wicked thieves had stolen his master's clothes. Of course, this was a lie. Puss had hidden them himself. The king, feeling sorry for the Marquis, ordered a magnificent suit of clothes for him from his own royal wardrobe. Dressed in fine garments, Thomas looked incredibly handsome, and when the princess saw him, she fell in love with him instantly. The king invited the young Marquis to join them in the carriage. Puss in Boots, overjoyed that his plan was working, ran ahead of the carriage. He came across some peasants mowing a meadow. "Good people," he said with a serious face, "the king is coming this way. If he asks who this meadow belongs to, you must say it belongs to the Marquis of Carabas. If you don't, you'll be chopped into tiny pieces." The peasants were terrified and agreed. When the king's carriage passed and he asked who owned the beautiful meadow, they all replied, "It belongs to the Marquis of Carabas, your Majesty." The king was very impressed with the Marquis's vast lands, but Puss ran on ahead and did the same with some harvesters in a wheat field, and then with workers in a vast forest, all of whom told the king the lands belonged to the Marquis of Carabas. Finally, Puss in Boots arrived at a grand castle. This castle belonged to a powerful ogre, a shapeshifter who could turn himself into any creature he wished. This was the true owner of all the lands the king had just seen. Puss bravely knocked on the door. The ogre let him in, curious about the small, booted cat. "I have heard," said Puss, "that you have the amazing ability to change into any animal you please. For instance, a lion or an elephant." "That's true," boomed the ogre, and to prove it, he instantly turned into a roaring lion. Puss was so frightened he nearly jumped out of his boots. Once the ogre changed back, Puss said that was impressive. "But I bet you can't change into something very small, like a mouse." "That would be impossible." "Impossible," roared the ogre, feeling his pride was at stake. "Watch this." And in a flash, he turned himself into a tiny mouse scurrying across the floor. In that very instant, Puss pounced on the mouse and gobbled him up. Just then, the king's carriage arrived at the castle. Puss in Boots ran to the gate and bowed deeply. "Welcome, your majesty, to the castle of the Marquis of Carabas." The king was astounded. "What? This magnificent castle is also yours, Marquise Thomas?" Now, truly looking the part of a wealthy nobleman, simply bowed and led the princess into the grand hall. The king was so impressed with the Marquis's wealth, charm, and character, and seeing how much his daughter adored him, that he offered Thomas the princess's hand in marriage that very day, and so the poor miller's son married the princess and became a prince. And Puss in Boots, he became a great lord, living in luxury at the castle, and he never had to chase mice again, except for a little fun.